Strategic decisions are rarely made in a vacuum. They're influenced by countless human factors, some conscious, others hidden from plain view. One of the most powerful forces behind our choices is cognitive bias, tendencies or patterns in human thinking that deviate from rational judgment. In this lesson, we'll explore several common cognitive biases that impact strategic thinking, how to recognize them, and what actions you can take to reduce their influence. By the end, you'll be better equipped to make decisions grounded in logic, not just instinct. Let's start with a common one, confirmation bias. This happens when we seek out, remember, or favor information that supports what we already believe, while ignoring evidence that challenges our views. Imagine a manager launching a new product. They might focus only on positive customer survey data, overlooking early signs of manufacturing delays. When strategic decisions are filtered through this lens, risk increases and objectivity suffers. Another frequent bias is anchoring. This occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. For example, in strategy meetings, the first budget estimate or growth forecast shared often shapes the rest of the conversation, even if better data comes later. Anchoring can skew judgments if that initial figure wasn't well researched or relevant to the final strategy. Next, consider availability bias. This is when we overestimate the likelihood or importance of information that's most readily recalled, especially if it's recent, vivid, or emotionally striking. Suppose a recent cyber attack hit a high-profile competitor. Leadership might rush into increasing cybersecurity spending, even if internal threat assessments show low actual risk. Strategic leaders must balance instinctive reactions with data-driven reasoning. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy. This bias leads us to continue investing in something just because we've already invested time, money, or effort, even when it's no longer a strategically sound decision. An example? A company pours additional funds into a failing technology platform, unwilling to abandon it after years of development. Recognizing this bias helps avoid throwing good resources after bad. Overconfidence bias is another common trap. It's the tendency to overestimate the accuracy of our predictions, knowledge, or strategic choices. For instance, a leader might launch a new market expansion based on personal gut feeling, ignoring the lack of supporting market data. While confidence is necessary in leadership, unchecked overconfidence can lead to costly miscalculations. Groupthink also plays a big role in strategic missteps. This happens when the desire for consensus in a group overrides critical thinking. Team members may avoid raising objections just to keep the peace. A leadership team might approve a questionable merger because no one wants to challenge the CEO's enthusiasm. Encouraging dissent and diversity of perspective can help counteract this bias. Hindsight bias is what we experience when we look back on past events and believe we knew it all along. It can distort lessons from failure or success. After a project fails, some might claim the outcome was obvious and should have been avoided, though in truth, that wasn't clear at the time. This bias can hinder future learning if it prevents honest reflection on complexity and uncertainty. Status quo bias is when decision makers favor keeping things the same, even when change is needed. It shows up as a preference for familiar routines and resistance to new approaches. For example, a retail chain might stick with an outdated store format, citing tradition, despite shifting consumer expectations. Strategic thinking requires continual questioning of default choices. Let's also consider attribution bias. This is the tendency to attribute others' successes or failures to internal factors like talent or effort, while overemphasizing external factors in our own case. If a competitor outperforms us, we might blame their lucky timing instead of analyzing their strategy. This bias can block us from recognizing what others are doing well and adapting accordingly. There's also escalation of commitment. This is when we irrationally stick to a decision, even when data shows it's failing. It's related to the sunk cost fallacy, but adds emotional or reputational stakes, like continuing with a bad partnership to save face. Effective leaders must be willing to course correct, accept hard truths, and detach ego from outcomes. Beyond individual biases, strategic decision-making can suffer from framing effects. These occur when the way a problem is presented influences decisions. For example, a proposal to reduce costs might seem more attractive when framed as cutting excess rather than laying off employees. Reframing options neutrally helps teams evaluate them more clearly. Another bias-related challenge is selective perception. We often interpret ambiguous data in ways that confirm our preconceptions. Reading a market trend One team might see opportunity while another sees risk, depending on their internal goals. Awareness of this bias encourages greater context sharing and reduces blind spots. To reduce these biases, start by slowing down critical decisions. Strategic thinking benefits from pacing, time for reflection, feedback, and data validation. When a major decision feels rushed, stop and ask, what assumptions are we making here? What perspectives are missing? Second, seek diverse viewpoints. Surround yourself with people who think differently, ask hard questions, and challenge the dominant view. This diversity helps surface unconscious biases before they lock into strategy. Third, use structured decision tools like decision trees, risk matrices, and scenario planning. These frameworks prompt more systematic analysis, decreasing the room for bias-driven shortcuts. Leaders can also benefit from role reversal exercises. For example, ask someone to argue against the strategy they currently support. This technique, sometimes called a red team review, encourages critical thinking and exposes weaknesses early. Regular postmortems and after-action reviews are important too. Gather your team after a project to ask, what went well, what failed, and what surprised us. Honest reflection helps identify patterns of bias and improves future decisions. Keep in mind that no one is immune to cognitive bias. They aren't signs of poor intelligence, they're features of how our brains evolved to process information quickly. But in high-stakes strategy work, speed isn't always an asset. The goal is to bring awareness to these mental shortcuts and manage their influence with deliberate structure. Training your team to recognize bias can build a more objective culture. Encourage curiosity and psychological safety, where challenging assumptions is welcome. Over time, this mindset strengthens collective strategic judgment. In summary, cognitive biases are ever present in strategy, but they don't have to control your decisions. By identifying and addressing these common thinking traps, you can lead with greater clarity and better outcomes. Up next, we'll dive deeper into how to sharpen your critical thinking and problem-solving skills for strategic success.